everyone. So I am opening up my May reading wrap-up with In Praise of Paths by Torbjorn Eveland, who is a Norwegian author, and it was translated by Becky L. Crook, I believe is her name. So I read this book for the Dewey's Readathon, and so I kind of started it the last day of April and then finished it a few days later, so I'm counting it as an April finish. This book was an exploration of the author's own experience being diagnosed with epilepsy and then no longer being allowed to drive. And so he kind of explores what that meant for him, and also the type of like society living in Norway and walking culture versus car culture. He also relates it to like creativity and how it's actually better to be moving when you're thinking. So like when people are trying to solve problems or resolve things, like it isn't actually natural for us to sit still and think. We actually think better if we're moving. So I thought that was really interesting because obviously our society praises people for being still and calm, when in actuality our very nature and how we've evolved is to be moving and engaging in movement, which helps us to think. So I certainly see that as important for my own journey, my own creative path. There is obviously questions about access in there and ability levels and people who are in a wheelchair or people who aren't able to walk for whatever reason. How do they then access those types of movements that can help them with that freedom of flow and movement? And how do they tap into that kind of nomadic sensibility that is innately within humans from our evolution, but obviously cannot be used in the method of walking itself. So those are all interesting questions that he didn't really go into, and I think could have been a really interesting viewpoint for which he could have done a chapter. So yeah, he does a lot of talking about nature in Norway. He does a lot of talking about a cabin where his family owned, and the path behind it and his memories of it and our sense of memory, and also adventuring. So going out and, walking the forest and with friends and kind of orienteering and not really knowing where he's going, and the idea of getting lost and finding yourself. At one point he's tries to wear shoes as little as possible, so on a summer vacation even like goes to the store not wearing shoes, and the effect that has on his feet, and kind of like how freeing he found that, and how for him movement and walking is like his release, his way of relaxing. Yeah, he covers a lot of different things, all very interesting perspectives to look at the world and to kind of reflect on in your own life and your own relationship to paths and how they're formed and walking. So overall, I enjoyed it. It was a very good start to a month where I will be reading a lot about nature. I hope you are well. I will check in again when I have finished another book. Hi everyone. So I just finished Rainsongs by Sue Hubbard, which is a novel set in Ireland in modern day, and it follows a woman who is around, in her mid-50s. Her husband has just died suddenly, and she's visiting his cottage in Ireland, which is where her husband and her son and her used to go on family vacations, and their son tragically died when he was young. So she's kind of there to wrap up his affairs, but also to kind of figure out her next steps and the next things she wants to do in her life. So when I first read the first chapter of this book, I got very excited, and because it reminded me of The Labyrinth by Amanda Lowery, which is an Australian novel that I read last year that I loved, because it has this same idea, this woman, middle-aged woman on her own, going to kind of a wild place in nature to kind of find themselves. And this book certainly had that in it, but what Hubbard did, which I found distracted me from that main story, was adding in a lot of backstory about other characters. So, a kind of real estate developer who's done very well financially, who's trying to like bring Ireland into the 21st century and, increase his own wealth. You have a farmer who lives in the same mountain as the main character Martha's cottage is on, who is holding on to his life and his traditions and his way of looking at Ireland. Then you have a young adult man who is also trying to straddle this kind of modern versus older version of Ireland. So it is really in a lot of ways about Ireland as a place that's struggling between the impressions that people have of it as a tourist destination, the reality of living there as an Irish person, and then an outsider coming in and observing. So there's like all these different perspectives, and I think they were very valid, but what I was hoping it would be was more of a focus on Martha, the main character, and her evolution and her internal dialogue. I didn't really want everyone else's opinions on the place. So it didn't really end up being similar to Labyrinth, because the Labyrinth really focuses in on that one main character and you follow her journey. And so this one is much more about Ireland as a place. It's a kind of commentary on Ireland. I would be actually really interested in hearing an Irish person's impressions of this book, because I think it was written by an English author, and she cites her resources in the back of the book for the impressions that she expresses in this book, saying, specifically saying that they're not her own, they are from other Irish authors who she was taking this information from. I liked, there was a reference to the title in the book where it was talking about Rainsongs being the national anthems of Ireland, and this, there was a lot of interesting commentary in there. Like, it was definitely an enjoyable read, even though it didn't end up being the type of book that I was looking for. I thought in terms of the plot, it wrapped up very nicely. It was tied in a nice little bow, and it had, the characters were interesting, and I wanted to follow them. So in that way, it was a successful read. I wouldn't say that I loved it as much as I could have. I think it could have been something that I loved as much as I loved The Labyrinth by Amanda Lowry. So maybe that was a detriment to the book, is that I read the first chapter, expected it to be one thing, and then it didn't turn out to be that thing. So I couldn't really give it the full credit that it's due. I think it was a good read. I'm glad I read it. I learned a lot more about Ireland. I think, I'm interested in reading more about Ireland. I feel like that's a place that I've always been interested in, since I do have ancestry from there, but learning more about it and kind of the complexities and all of that type of thing, I think is great, and I think I will pursue reading more Irish lit, hopefully from Irish authors, though. But I'm so glad I read this. It was a good atmospheric read for this very rainy May that we've been having here. So it kind of went with the weather. This was not set in the spring in Ireland. It was set in January, so the month of January. So obviously a very cold, wet, rainy month in Ireland. So yeah, overall, I enjoyed it. Hi, everyone. So today is the first nice sunny weekend day that we've had for quite a while. Our spring has been very cold and rainy, so it's really nice to be able to be outside on my deck to share with you that I finished House Made of Rain by Pamela Porter. This is a BC poet and her collection of poetry, and I loved this. I gave it 5 stars. These types of poems are my favorite. They are emotional. They are very representing nature and nature imagery. And there was also like a level of melancholy to this collection. All of the poems, most of the poems referenced a father, and so an absent father or the absence of fathering love. So that was a really interesting theme that kind of ran through all of them. There's 3 different sections. The first poem is a very long one, allegorical poem. I don't even know what poems are really supposed to be called in that situation, but it's called Atonement, and it has 20, 40 pages, 50 pages of verse, 50 pages of verse. And then the other poems in the middle are like kind of more traditional ones, each with a title. And then near the end, there's kind of another kind of longer collection called the Book of Astonishments. So it's really, really beautiful. Lots of animals, lots of plants, lots of evocative imagery, which is what I love at poetry and what satisfies me, and definitely made me feel like it was spring, and just took me on a visual journey, an internal poetic journey through each poem. So I would recommend this one. I'm going to actually buy this collection to have for myself because I would love to revisit some of these in the future. And so a really good choice for Springathon and for the month of May. Hello. Okay, so my latest finish for May has been Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, and I listened to that on audio. And I'm really glad that I decided to do that, to listen to it on audio, because it was, as I suspected, a very science-heavy book, and very analytical, and very well written. And it was actually really interesting to learn about the newest scientific discoveries of the early 1960s, and but overall, in terms of a book that I found inspiring, I don't feel like that was, there wasn't really an emotional connection or thread through this book. It was very factual and stuck to the point, which I'm sure was very good for the time and for burgeoning the environmental movement, and for like bringing people's attention to the, how terrible DDT was and is as a chemical, and then like explaining the effect of chemicals and the controlling of insects. And so, all those things I totally understood and I totally appreciated, but I also felt like it didn't have the impact on me, which I kind of assumed it wouldn't. So my assumptions were correct, that it's not a book about connection to nature or re-establishing those cycles and like your place in them necessarily. I think that is talked about in the book, but it's not done in a way that is emotional. There's very little emotion involved. And if you're new here, for me, a book has to bring forth some sort of emotion to really have a big impact on me. So I'm very glad that I listened to it because I think I now know the basis of Rachel Carson's work and how she does. I don't think I would read another of her books. I don't think they're the type of book that, I'm not the audience that she's going for with these books. I don't enjoy statistics and numbers and scientific studies explained. That's really not an area of reading that I feel like is for me. So, but I definitely still want to read her biography and learn more about her as a person. I'm always more fascinated with people's personalities and their lives in cases like people like Rachel Carson than I am about their actual output. Like, so the things she wrote are not really for me, but I'm interested to learn about her life and the things that inspired her and the things that pushed her forward in her life. So that is Silent Spring, and I will check in again when I've finished another book. Hi everyone. I finished The Rain Heron by Robbie Arnott earlier today, and I really liked it. It has a very different feeling from Flames, so I think because I loved Flames so much, it may have influenced my perception of how this book was going to be. This book is much more solemn. It has a kind of dystopian future scenario happening. You do not know where the place is. You do not know anything about the country that it's set in other than north, south, and like the descriptions of nature. The seaside, mountains, different vegetation, things like that. So this mythical creature is the main character, and the other main character is kind of, I find the back is kind of misleading. I think it should have been, the blurb should have been written differently from a different perspective, because I think that would have prepared me better for the overall plot of the book. I feel like this is a redemption story. It's a story about the power of nature, and there's a lot of talk in here kind of about climate change, and the climate of this country is changing a lot, and it's something that people are moving, people are abandoning their jobs, people are leaving their lives to try to find livelihoods elsewhere. So that's kind of the underlying theme. It's also about survival. I think there's a thread of survival through the whole story of like what people do to survive and what people will endure to survive, and redemption. I would say it's also a redemption story. So beautiful nature writing, but a bit more stark, a bit bleaker than Flames. So I did really enjoy it, and this will probably be my last read of May. I am still working on Spring Heat Rains. Spring Heat Rain, is that what it's called? Yeah, Spring Heat Rains. So I will be carrying that over into June. And yeah, I think overall May has been a good reading month. I've had some nice nature writing to enjoy. And thank you very much for watching this video. I will be back again soon with another one. And have a great rest of your day.